Section 1 of the Sorrows of Young Werther. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. As read by Rob De Lorenzo in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Section 1. Preface. I have carefully collected whatever I have been able to learn of the story of poor Werther, and here present it to you, knowing that you will thank me for it. To his spirit and character you cannot refuse your admiration and love. To his fate you will not deny your tears. And thou, good soul, who sufferest the same distress as he endured once, draw comfort from his sorrows. And let this little book be thy friend, if, owing to good fortune, or through thine own fault, thou canst not find a dearer companion. Book 1. May 4. How happy I am that I am gone! My dear friend, what a thing is the heart of man! To leave you, from whom I have been inseparable, whom I love so dearly, and yet to feel so happy! I know you will forgive me. Have not other attachments been specifically appointed by fate to torment a head like mine? Poor Lenora! And yet I was not to blame. Was it my fault that, whilst the particular charms of her sister afforded me an agreeable entertainment, a passion for me was engendered in her feeble heart? And yet am I wholly blameless? Did I not encourage her emotions? Did I not feel charmed at those truly genuine expressions of nature, which, though but little mirthful in reality, so often amused us? Did I not? But oh, what is man, that he dares so to accuse himself? My dear friend, I promise you that I will improve. I will no longer, as has ever been my habit, continue to ruminate on every petty vexation which fortune may dispense. I will enjoy the present, and the past shall be for me the past. No doubt you are right, my best of friends. There will be far less suffering amongst mankind, if men, and God knows why they are so fashioned, did not employ their imaginations so assiduously in recalling the memory of past sorrow, instead of bearing their present lot with equanimity. Be kind enough to inform my mother that I shall attend to her business to the best of my ability, and shall give her the earliest information about it. I have seen my aunt, and find that she is very far from being the disagreeable person our friends allege her to be. She is a very lively, cheerful woman, with the best of hearts. I explained to her my mother's wrongs with regard to that part of her portion which has been withheld from her. She told me the motives and the reasons for her own conduct, and the terms on which she is willing to give up the whole, and to do more than we have asked. In short, I cannot write further upon this subject at present. Only assure my mother that all will go on well. And I have again observed, my dear friend, in this trifling affair, that misunderstandings and neglect occasion more mischief in the world than even malice and wickedness. At all events, the two latter are of less frequent occurrence. In other respects, I am very well off here. Solitude in this terrestrial paradise is a genial balm to my mind, and the young spring cheers with its bounteous promises my oftentimes misgiving heart. Every tree, every bush, is full of flowers, and one might wish himself transformed into a butterfly to float about in this ocean of perfume and find his whole existence in it. The town itself is disagreeable, but then, all around, you find an inexpressible beauty of nature. This induced the late Count M to lay out a garden on one of the sloping hills, which here intersect each other with the most charming variety, and form the most lovely valleys. The garden is simple, and it is easy to perceive, even upon your first entrance, that the plan was not designed by a scientific gardener, but by a man who wished to give himself up here to the enjoyment of his own sensitive heart. Many a tear I have already shed to the memory of its departed master in a summer house which is now reduced to ruins, but was his favourite resort, and now is mine. I shall soon be the master of the place. The gardener has become attached to me within the last few days, and he will lose nothing thereby. May 10. A wonderful serenity has taken possession of my entire soul, like these sweet mornings of spring which I enjoy with my whole heart. I am alone, and feel the charm of existence in this spot, which was created for the bliss of souls like mine. I am so happy, my dear friend, so absorbed in the exquisite sense of mere tranquil existence. I have neglected my talents. I should be incapable of drawing a single stroke at the present moment, and yet I feel that I never was a greater artist than now, when, while the lovely valley teems with vapour around me, and the meridian sun strikes the upper surface of the impenetrable foliage of my trees, and but a few stray gleams steal into the inner sanctuary, I throw myself down along the tall grass by the trickling stream, and, as I lie close upon the earth, 1,000 unknown plants are unnoticed by me, when I hear the buzz of the little world among the stalks, and grow familiar with the countless indescribable forms of insects and flies. Then I feel the presence of the Almighty, who formed us in his own image, and the breath of the universal love which bears and sustains us, as it floats around us in an eternity of bliss. And then, my friend, when darkness overspreads my eyes, and heaven and earth seem to dwell in my soul and absorb its power, like the form of a beloved mistress, then I often think with longing, oh, would I could describe these conceptions, could impress upon paper all that is living so full and warm within me, and that might be the mirror of my soul, as my soul is the mirror of the infinite God. Oh, my friend, but it is too much for my strength. I sink under the weight of the splendour of these visions. May 12. I know not whether some deceitful spirits haunt this spot, or whether it be the warm celestial fancy in my own heart which makes everything around me seem like paradise. In front of the house is a fountain to which I am bound by a charm like Melusina and her sisters. Descending a great slope, you come to an arch, where, some 20 steps down lower, water from the clear crystal gushes from the marble rock. The narrow wall which encloses it above, the tall trees which encircle the spot, and the coolness of the place itself, everything imprints a pleasant but sublime impression. Not a day passes on which I do not spend an hour here. The young maidens come from the town to fetch water, innocent and necessary employment, and formerly the occupation of the daughters of kings. As I take my rest there, the idea of the old patriarchal life is awakened around me. I see them, our old ancestors, how they formed their friendships and contracted alliances at the fountain side, and I feel how fountains and streams were guarded by beneficial spirits. He who is a stranger to these sensations has never really enjoyed a cool repose at the side of a fountain after the fatigue of a weary summer day. May 13. You ask if you shall send me books. My dear friend, I beseech you, for the love of God, relieve me from such a yoke. I need no more to be guided, agitated, heated. My heart ferments sufficiently of itself. I want strains to lull me, and I find them to perfection in my Homer. Often do I strive to allay the burning fever of my blood, and you have never witnessed anything so unsteady, so uncertain as my heart. But need I confess this to you, my dear friend, who have so often endured the anguish of witnessing my sudden transitions from sorrow to immoderate joy, and from sweet melancholy to violent passions? I treat my poor heart like a sick child, and gratify its every fancy. Do not mention this again. There are people who would censure me for it. May 15. The common people of the place know me already, and love me, particularly the children, At first I associated with them, and inquired in a friendly tone about their various trifles. Some fancied that I wished to ridicule them, and turned from me in exceeding ill humour. I did not allow that circumstance to grieve me. I only felt most keenly what I have often observed. Persons who can claim a certain rank keep themselves coldly aloof from the common people, as though they feared to lose their importance by the contact, whilst wanton idlers, and such are prone to bad joking, affect to descend to their level, only to make the poor people feel their impertinence all the more keenly. I know very well that we are not all equal, nor can we be so, but it is my opinion that he who avoids the common people, in order not to lose their respect, is as much to blame as a coward who hides himself from his enemy because he fears defeat. The other day I went to the fountain, and found a young servant girl who had set her pitcher on the lowest step, and looked about her to see if her companions were approaching to place it on her head. I ran down and looked at her. "Shall I help you, pretty lass?" I asked. She blushed deeply. "Oh, sir!" she exclaimed. "No ceremony," I replied. She adjusted her headgear, and I helped her. She thanked me, and ascended the steps. May 17. I have made all sorts of acquaintances, but as of yet found no society. I know not what attraction I possess for the people, so many of them like me, and attach themselves to me, and then I feel sorry when the road we pursue together goes only a short distance. If you inquire what the people are like here, I must answer, the same as everywhere. The human race is but a monotonous affair. Most of them labour the great part of their lifetime for mere subsistence, and the scanty portion of freedom which remains to them so troubles them that they use every exertion to get rid of it. Oh, the destiny of man! But they are right good sort of people. If I occasionally forget myself, and take part in the innocent pleasures which are not yet forbidden to the peasantry, and enjoy myself, for instance, with a genuine freedom and sincerity, round a well-covered table, or arrange an excursion or a happy dance opportunely, and so forth, all this produces a good effect upon my disposition. Only I must forget that there lie dormant within me so many other qualities which moulder uselessly, and which I am obliged to carefully conceal. Ah! This thought affects my spirits fearfully, and yet to be misunderstood is the fate of the like of us. Alas, that the friend of my youth is gone! Alas, that I ever knew her! I might say to myself, "You are a dreamer, to seek what is not to be found here below." But she has been mine. I have possessed that heart, that noble soul, in whose presence I seemed to be more than I really was, because I was all that I could be. Good heavens! Did then a single power of my soul remain unexercised? In her presence could I not display, to its full extent, that mysterious feeling with which my heart embraces nature? Was not our intercourse a perpetual web of the finest emotions, of the keenest wit, the varieties of which, even in their very eccentricity, bore the stamps of genius? Alas! The few years by which she was my senior brought her to the grave before me. Never can I forget her firm mind or her heavenly patience. A few days ago I met a certain young V, a frank, open fellow, with a most pleasing countenance. He has just left the university, does not deem himself otherwise, but believes he knows more than other people. He has worked hard, as I can perceive many circumstances, and, in short, possesses a large stock of information. When he heard that I am drawing a good deal, and that I know Greek, two wonderful things for this part of the country, he came to me, and displayed his whole store of learning, from Bateau to Wood, from De Palais to Winckelmann. He assured me he had read through the first part of Sultra's theory, and also possessed a manuscript of Heine's work on the study of the antique. I allowed it all to pass. I have become acquainted also with a very worthy person, the district judge, a frank and open-hearted man. I am told it is a most delightful thing to see him in the midst of his children, of whom he has 9. His eldest daughter especially is highly spoken of. He has invited me to go and see him, and I intend to do so on the first opportunity. He lives at one of the royal hunting lodges, which can be reached from here in an hour and a half by walking, and which he obtained leave to inhabit after the loss of his wife, as it was so painful to him to reside in town and at the court. There have also come, in my way, a few other originals of a questionable sort, who are in all respects undesirable, and most intolerable in their demonstration of friendship. Goodbye. This letter will please you. It is quite historical. May 22nd. That the life of man is but a dream, many a man has surmised heretofore, and I, too, am everywhere pursued by this feeling. When I consider the narrow limits within which our active and inquiring faculties are confined, when I see how all our energies are wasted in providing for the mere necessities, which again have no further end than to prolong a wretched existence, and then that all our satisfactions concerning certain subjects of investigation ends in nothing better than passive resignation, whilst we assume ourselves painting our prison walls with bright figures and brilliant landscapes. When I consider all this, Wilhelm, I am silent. I examine my own being, and find there a world, but a world rather of imagination and dim desires than of distinctiveness and living power. Then everything swims before my senses, and I smile and dream while pursuing my way through the world. All learned professors and doctors are agreed that children do not comprehend the cause of their desires, but that grown-ups should wander about this earth like children, without knowing whence they come or whither they go, influenced as little by fixed motives, but guided like them by biscuits, sugar plums, and the rod. This is what no one is willing to acknowledge, and yet I think it is palatable. I know what you will say in reply, for I am ready to admit that they are the happiest, who, like children, amuse themselves in their playthings, dress and undress their dolls, and attentively watch the cupboard, where mamma has locked up the sweet things, and when at last they get a delicious morsel, eat it greedily, and exclaim, "More!" These are happy people. But others also are objects of envy, who dignify their paltry employments, and sometimes even their passions, with pompous titles, representing them to mankind as gigantic achievements, performed in their welfare and glory. But the man who humbly acknowledges the vanity of all this, who observes with what pleasure the thriving citizen converts his little garden into a paradise, and how patiently even the poor man pursues his weary way under his burden, and how all wish equally to behold the light of the sun a little bit longer, yes, such a man is at peace, and creates his own world within himself. And he is also happy, because he is a man. And then, however limited his sphere, he still perseveres in his bosom the sweet feeling of liberty, and knows that he can quit his prison whenever he likes. May 26. You know of old my ways of settling anywhere, of selecting a little cottage in some cosy spot, and of putting up in it with every inconvenience. Here too I have discovered such a snug, comfortable place, which possesses peculiar charms for me. About a league from the town is a place called Walheim. The reader need not take the trouble to look for the place thus designated. We have found it necessary to change the names given in the original. It is delightfully situated on the side of a hill, and by proceeding along one of the footpaths which leads out to the village, you can have a view of the whole valley. A good old woman lives there, who keeps a small inn. She sells wine, beer, and coffee, and is cheerful and pleasant notwithstanding her age. The chief charm of this spot consists of 2 linden trees, spreading their enormous branches over the little green before the church, which is entirely surrounded by peasants' cottages, barns, and homesteads. I have seldom seen a place so retired and peaceful, and there often have my table and chair brought out from the little inn, and drink my coffee there, and read my Homer. Accident brought me to the spot one fine afternoon, and I found it perfectly deserted. Everybody was in the fields except a little boy about 4 years of age, who was sitting on the ground, and held between his knees a child about 6 months old. He pressed it to his bosom with both arms, which thus formed a sort of armchair, and, notwithstanding the liveliness which sparkled in the black eyes, it remained perfectly still. The sight charmed me. I sat upon a plough opposite, and sketched with great delight this little picture of brotherly tenderness. I added the neighbouring hedge, the barn door, and some broken cartwheels, just as they happened to lie, and I found in about an hour that I had made a very correct and interesting drawing, without putting in the slightest thing of my own. This confirmed me in my resolution of adhering, for the future, entirely to nature. She alone is inexhaustible, and capable of forming the greatest masters. Much may be alleged in favour of rules, as much may be likewise advanced in favour of the laws of society. An artist formed upon them will never produce anything absolutely bad or disgusting, as a man who observes the laws, and obeys decorum, can never be an absolutely intolerable neighbour, nor a decided villain. But yet, say what you will of rules, they destroy the genuine feeling of nature, as well as its true expression. Do not tell me that this is too hard, that they only restrain and prune superfluous branches, etc. My good friend, I will illustrate this by an analogy. These things resemble love. A warm-hearted youth becomes strongly attached to a maiden. He spends every hour of the day in her company, wears out his health, and lavishes his fortune, to afford continual proof that he is wholly devoted to her. Then comes a man of the world, a man of place and respectability, and addresses him thus: "My good young friend, love is natural, but you must love within bounds. Divide your time. Devote a portion to business, and give the hours of recreation to your mistress. Calculate your fortune, and out of this superfluity you may make her a present, only not too often, on her birthday and such occasions. Pursuing this advice, he may become a useful member of society, and I should advise every prince to give him an appointment. But it is all up with his love, and with his genius, if he be an artist. Oh, my friend, why is it that the torrent of genius so seldom bursts forth, so seldom rolls in full flowing stream, overwhelming your astounded soul? Because, on either side of the stream, cold and respectable persons have taken up their abodes, and forsooth their summer houses and tulip beds would suffer from the torrent, wherefore they dig trenches and raise embankments betimes, in order to avert the impending danger. May 27th. I find I have fallen into raptures, declamation, and similes, and have forgotten, in consequence, to tell you what became of the children. Absorbed in my artistic contemplations, which I briefly described in my letter of yesterday, I continued sitting on the plough for 2 hours. Toward evening, a young woman, with a basket on her arm, came running toward the children, who had not moved all that time. She exclaimed from a distance, "You are a good boy, Philip." She gave me a greeting. I returned it, rose, and approached her. I inquired if she were the mother of these pretty children. "Yes," she said, and giving the eldest a piece of bread, she took the little one in her arms and kissed it with a mother's tenderness. "I left my child in Philip's care," she said, "whilst I went to town with my eldest boy to buy some wheaten bread, some sugar, and an earthen pot. I saw the various articles in the basket, from which the cover had fallen. I shall make some broth tonight for my little Hans," which was the name of the youngest. "That wild fellow, the big one, broke my pot yesterday, whilst he was scrambling with Philip for what remained of the contents. I inquired for the eldest, and she bade scarcely time to tell me that he was driving a couple of geese home from the meadow, when he ran up and handed Philip an osier twig. I talked a little longer with the woman, and found that she was the daughter of a schoolmaster, and that her husband was gone on a journey to Switzerland for some money a relation had left him. They want to cheat him, she said, and would not answer his letters, so he had to go there himself. I hope he has met with no accident, as I have heard nothing of him since his departure. I left the woman, with regret, giving each one of the children a kreutzer, with an additional one for the youngest, to buy some wheaten bread for his broth when she go to town next, and so we departed. I assure you, my dear friend, when my thoughts are all in a tumult, the sight of such a creature as this tranquilizes my disturbed mind. She moves in a happy thoughtlessness within the confined circle of her existence. She supplies her wants from day to day, and when she sees the leaves fall, they raise no other idea in her mind than that winter is approaching. Since that time I have gone out there frequently. The children have become quite familiar to me, and each get a lump of sugar when I drink my coffee, and they share my milk and bread and butter in the evening. They always receive their kreutzer on Sundays, for the good woman has orders to give it to them when I do not go there after evening service. They are quite at home with me, tell me everything. I am particularly amused with observing their tempers, and the simplicity of their behaviour, when some of the other village children are assembled with them. It has given me a great deal of trouble to satisfy the anxiety of mother, lest, as she says, they should inconvenience the gentleman. May 30th. What I have lately said of painting is equally true with respect to poetry. It is only necessary for us to know what is really excellent, and venture to give it expression, and that is saying much in a few words. Today I have had a scene, which, if literally related, would make the most beautiful idyll in the world. But why should I talk of poetry and scenes of idylls? Can we never take pleasure in nature without having recourse to art? If you expect anything grand or magnificent from this introduction, you will be sadly mistaken. It relates merely to a peasant lad, who has excited in me the warmest interest. As usual, I shall tell my story badly, and you, as usual, will think me extravagant. It is Walheim once more, always Walheim, which produces these wonderful phenomena. A party had assembled outside the house under the linden trees to drink coffee. The company did not exactly please me, and, under one pretext or another, I lingered behind. A peasant came from the adjoining house, and set to work arranging some part of the same plough which I had lately sketched. His appearance pleased me, and I spoke to him, inquired about his circumstances, made his acquaintance, and, as my wont with persons of that class, had soon admitted into his confidence. He said he was in the service of a young widow, who set great store by him. He spoke so much of the mistress, and praised her so extravagantly, that I could soon see he was desperately in love with her. She is no longer young, he said, and she was treated so badly by her former husband that she does not mean to marry again. From his account, it was so evident what incomparable charms she possessed for him, and how ardently he wished she would select him to extinguish the recollection of her first husband's misconduct, that I should have to repeat his own words in order to describe the depth of the poor fellow's attachment, truth, and devotion. It would, in fact, require the gifts of a great poet to convey the expression of his features, the harmony of his voice, and the heavenly fire of his eyes. No words can portray the tenderness of his every movement and of every feature. No effort of mine could do justice to that scene. His alarm lest I should misconceive his position with regard to his mistress, or question the propriety of her conduct, touched me particularly. The charming manner with which he described her form and person, which, without possessing the graces of youth, won and attracted him to her, is inexpressible, and must be left to the imagination. I have never in my life witnessed or fancied or conceived the possibility of such intense devotion, such ardent affections, united with so much purity. Do not blame me if I say that the recollection of this innocence and truth is deeply impressed upon my very soul, that this picture of fidelity and tenderness haunts me everywhere, and that my own heart, as though enkindled by the flame, glows and burns within me. I mean now to try and see her as soon as I can, or perhaps, on second thoughts, I had better not. It is better that I should behold her through the eyes of her lover. To my sight, perhaps, she would not appear as she now stands before me, and why should I destroy so sweet a picture? End of section 1 of The Sorrows of Young Werther. Section 2 of the Sorrows of Young Werther. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, as read by Rob DeLorenzo in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Section 2. June 16. Why do I not write to you? You lay claim to learning, and ask such a question. You should have guessed that I am well. That is to say, in a word, I have made an acquaintance who has won my heart. I know not. To give you a regular account of the manner in which I have become acquainted with the most amiable women would be a difficult task. I am a happy and contented mortal, but a poor historian. An angel! Nonsense! Everybody so describes his mistress, and yet I find it impossible to tell you how perfect she is, or why she is so perfect. Suffice it to say, she has captivated all of my senses. So much simplicity with so much understanding, so mild, and yet so resolute, a mind so placid, and a life so active. But all this is ugly balderdash, which expresses not a single character or feature. Some other time, but no, not some other time, now, this very instant, I will tell you all about it. Now or never. Well, between ourselves, since I commenced my letter, I have been 3 times on the point of throwing down my pen, of ordering my horse, and of riding out, and yet I have vowed this morning that I would not ride today, and yet every moment I am rushing to the window to see how high the sun is. I could not restrain myself. Go to her I must. I have just returned, Wilhelm, and whilst I am taking supper, I will write to you. What a delight it was for my soul to see her in the midst of her dear, beautiful children. 8 brothers and sisters. But, if I proceed thus, you will be no wiser at the end of my letter than you were at the beginning. Attend, then. I will compel myself to give you the details. I mentioned to you the other day that I have become acquainted with S., the district judge, and that he invited me to go and visit him in his retirement, or rather in his little kingdom. But I neglected going, and perhaps should have never gone, if chance had not discovered to me the treasure which lay concealed in that retired spot. Some of our young people have proposed giving a ball in the country, at which I consented to be present. I offered my hand for the evening to a pretty and agreeable, but rather commonplace sort of girl from the immediate neighbourhood, and it was agreed that I should engage a carriage, and call upon Charlotte, with my partner and her aunt, to convey them to the ball. My companion informed me, as we drove along through the park to the hunting lodge, that should I make the acquaintance of a very charming young lady, take care, the aunt said, that you do not lose your heart. Why? Said I. Because she is already engaged to a very worthy man, she replied, who is gone to settle his affairs upon the death of his father, and will succeed to a very considerable inheritance. This information possessed no interest for me. When we arrived at the gate, the sun was setting behind the tops of the mountains. The atmosphere was heavy, and the ladies expressed their fears of an approaching storm, as masses of low black clouds were gathering on the horizon. I relieved their anxieties by pretending to be weather-wise, although I myself had some apprehensions lest our pleasure should be interrupted. I alighted, and the maid came to the door, and requested us to wait a moment for her mistress. I walked across the court to a well-built house, and, ascending the flight of steps in the front, opened the door, and saw before me the most charming spectacle I have ever witnessed. 6 children, from 11 to 2 years old, were running about the hall, and surrounding a young lady of middle height, with a lovely figure, dressed in a robe of simple white, trimmed with pink ribbons. She was holding a rye loaf in her hand, and was cutting slices for the little ones around her, in proportion to their age and appetite. She performed her task in a graceful and affectionate manner. Each claimant awaited for his turn with outstretched hands, and boisterously shouted his thanks. Some of them ran away at once to enjoy their evening meal, whilst others, of a gentler disposition, retired to the courtyard to see the strangers, and to survey the carriage in which Charlotte was to drive away. Pray forgive me for giving you the trouble to come for me, and for keeping the ladies waiting. But dressing and arranging some household duties before I leave had made me forget my children's supper, and they do not like to take it from any one but me. I uttered some indifferent compliment. By the whole, my soul was absorbed by her air, her voice, her manner, and I had scarcely recovered myself when she ran into the room to fetch her gloves and fan. The young ones threw an inquiring glance at me from a distance, whilst I approached the youngest, a most delicious little creature. He drew back, and Charlotte, entering at that very moment, said, "Louis, shake hands with your cousin." The little fellow obeyed willingly, and I could not resist giving him a hearty kiss, notwithstanding his rather dirty face. "Cousin," said I to Charlotte, as I handed her down, "do you think I deserve the happiness of being related to you?" She replied, with a ready smile, "Oh, I have such a number of cousins, that I should be sorry if you were the most undeserving of them." In taking leave, she desired her next sister, Sophie, a girl of about 11 years old, to take great care of the children, and to say good bye to papa for her when he came home from his ride. She enjoined the little ones to obey their sister Sophie as they would herself, upon which some promised that they would, but a little fair-haired girl, of about 6 years old, looked discontented and said, "But Sophie is not you, Charlotte, and we like you best." The two eldest boys had clambered up to the carriage, and at my request she permitted them to accompany us a little way through the forest, upon their promising to sit very still and hold fast. We were hardly seated, and the ladies had scarcely exchanged compliments, making the usual remarks upon each other's dress, and upon the company they expected to meet, when Charlotte stopped in the carriage, and made her brothers get down. They insisted upon kissing her hands once more, which the eldest did with all the tenderness of a youth of 15, but the other in a lighter and more careless manner. She desired them again to give her love to the children, and we drove off. The aunt inquired of Charlotte whether she had finished the book that she had last sent. "No," said Charlotte, "I did not like it. You can have it again. And the one before that was not much better." I was surprised, upon asking the title, to hear that it was. We feel obliged to suppress the passage in the letter to prevent any one from feeling aggravated, although no author need pay much attention to the opinion of a mere girl, or that of an unsteady young man. I found penetration and character in everything she said. Every expression seemed to brighten her features with new charms, with new rays of genius, which unfolded by degrees as she felt herself understood. "When I was younger," she said, "I loved nothing so much as romances. Nothing could equal my delight when, on some holiday, I could settle down quietly in a corner, and enter my whole heart and soul into the joys or sorrows of some fictitious Lenora. I do not deny that they possess some charms for me yet, but I read so seldom that I prefer books suited exactly to my taste, and I like those authors best whose scenes describe my own situation in life, and the friends who are about me, whose stories touch me with interest, from resembling my own homely existence, which, without being absolutely paradise, is, on the whole, a source of indescribable happiness." I endeavoured to conceal the emotions which these words occasioned, but it was of slight avail, for, when she had expressed so truly her opinion of the Vicar of Wakefield, and of other works, the names of which I omit, though the names were omitted, yet the authors mentioned deserve Charlotte's approbation, and will feel it in their hearts when they read this passage. It concerns no other person. I could no longer contain myself, but gave full utterance to what I thought of it, and it was not until Charlotte had addressed herself to the two other ladies that I remembered their presence, and observed them sitting mute with astonishment. The aunt looked at me several times with an air of raillery, which, of course, I did not mind at all. We talked of the pleasures of dancing. "If it is a fault to love it," said Charlotte, "I am ready to confess that I prize it above all other amusements. If anything disturbs me, I go to the piano, play an air to which I have danced, and all goes right again directly." You, who know me, can fancy how steadfastly I gazed upon her rich dark eyes during these remarks, how my very soul gloated over her warm lips and fresh glowing cheeks, how I became quite lost in the delightful meaning of her words, so much so that I scarcely heard the actual expressions. In short, I alighted from the carriage like a person in a dream, and was so lost in the dim world around me that I scarcely heard the music which resonated from the illuminated ballroom. The two messieurs, Adrian and a certain N. I cannot trouble myself with the names, who were the aunt's and Charlotte's partners, received us at the carriage door, and took possession of their ladies, whilst I followed with mine. We commenced with a minuet. I led out one lady after another, and precisely those who were of the most disagreeable could not bring themselves to leave off. Charlotte and her partner began an English country dance, and you must imagine my delight when it was their turn to dance the figure with us. You should see Charlotte dance. She dances with her whole heart and soul. Her figure is all harmony, elegance, and grace, as if she were conscious of nothing else, and had no other thought or feeling, and, doubtless, for the moment, every other sensation is extinct. She was engaged for the second country dance, but promised me the third, and assured me, with the most agreeable freedom, that she was very fond of waltzing. "It is a custom here," she said, "for the previous partners to waltz together, but my partner is an indifferent waltzer, and I will feel delighted if I save him the trouble. Your partner is not allowed to waltz, and, indeed, is equally incapable, but I observed during the country dance that you waltz well. So, if you will waltz with me, I beg you would propose it to my partner, and I will propose it to yours." We agreed, and it was arranged that our partners should mutually entertain each other. We set off, and, at first, delighted ourselves with the usual graceful motions of the arms. With what grace, with what ease she moved! When the waltz commenced, and the dancers whirled around each other in a giddy maze, there was some confusion owing to the incapacity of some of the dancers. We judiciously remained still, allowing the others to weary themselves, and, when the awkward dancers had withdrawn, we joined in, and kept it up famously together with one other couple, Adrian and his partner. Never did I dance more lightly. I felt myself more than a mortal, holding this loveliest of creatures in my arms, flying with her as rapidly as the wind, till I lost sight of every other object, and, O Wilhelm, I vow at that moment that that maiden whom I loved, or for whom I felt the slightest attachment, never, never should waltz with anyone else but me, if I had to perdition for it. You will understand this. We took a few turns in the room to recover our breath. Charlotte sat down, and felt refreshed by partaking of some oranges which I had secured, the only ones that had been left; but at every slice which, from politeness, she offered to her neighbours, I felt as though a dagger went through my heart. We were the second couple in the third country dance. As we were going down, and heaven knows what ecstasy, I gazed at her arms and eyes, beaming with the sweetest feeling of pure and genuine enjoyment. We passed a lady whom I had noticed for her charming expression of countenance, although she was no longer young. She looked at Charlotte with a smile, then, holding up her finger in a threatening attitude, repeated twice in a very significant tone the voice of the name Albert. "Who is Albert?" I said to Charlotte, "if it is not impertinent to ask?" She was about to answer when we were obliged to separate in order to execute a figure in the dance, and, as we crossed over again in front of the other, I perceived she looked somewhat pensive. "Why need I conceal it from you?" she said, as she gave me her hand for the promenade. "Albert is a worthy man to whom I am engaged." Now there was nothing new to me in this, for the girls had told me of it on the way, but it was so far new that I had not thought of it in connection with her whom, in so short a time, I had learned to prize so highly. Enough! I became confused, got out in the figure, and occasioned general confusion, so that it required all Charlotte's presence of mind to set me right by pulling and pushing me into my proper place. The dance was not yet finished when the lightning, which had for some time been seen in the horizon, and which I had asserted to proceed entirely from heat, grew more violent, and the thunder was heard above the music. When any distress or terror surprises us in the midst of our amusements, it naturally makes a deeper impression than at other times, either because the contrast makes us more keenly susceptible, or rather because our senses are more open to the impressions, and the shock is consequently stronger. To this cause I must ascribe the fright and the shrieks of the ladies. One sat down in a corner with her back to the window, and held her fingers to her ears. A second knelt down before her, and hid her face in her lap. A third threw herself between them, and embraced her sister with 1,000 tears. Some insisted on going home. Others, unconscious of their actions, wanted sufficient presence of mind to repress the impertinence of the young partners, who sought to direct themselves to those sighs which the lips of our agitated beauties intended for heaven. Some of the gentlemen had gone downstairs to smoke a quiet cigar, and the rest of the company gladly embraced the happy suggestion of the hostess to retire to another room which was provided with shutters and curtains. We had hardly got there when Charlotte placed the chairs in a circle, and, when the company had sat down in compliance with her request, she forthwith proposed a round game. I noticed some of the company prepare their mouths and draw themselves up at the prospect of some agreeable forfeit. "Let us play at counting," she said. "Now pay attention. I shall go round the circle from right to left, and each person is to count, one after the other, the number that comes to him, and must count fast. Whoever stops or mistakes is to have a box on the ear, and so on until we have counted 1,000. It was so delightful to see the fun. She went round the circle with an upraised arm. 1, said the first; 2, said the second; 3, said the third; and so on, till Charlotte went faster and faster. One made a mistake. Instantly a box on the ear, and, amid the laughter that ensued, came another box, and so on, faster and faster. I myself came in for 2. I fancied that they were harder than the rest, and felt quite delighted. A general laughter and confusion put an end to the game long before we had counted as far as 1,000. The party broke up into little separate knots. The storm had ceased, and I followed Charlotte into the ballroom. On the way she said, "The game banished their fears of the storm." I could make no reply. "I myself," she continued, "was as much frightened as any of them, but by affecting courage to keep up the spirits of others, I forgot my own apprehensions." We went to the window. It was still thundering at a distance. A soft rain pouring down over the country, and filled the air around us with delicious odours. Charlotte leaned forward on her arm, her eyes wandering over the scene. She raised them to the sky, and then turned them upon me. They were moistened with tears. She placed her hand on mine, and said, "Klopstock!" At once I remembered the magnificent ode which was in her thoughts. I felt oppressed with the weight of my sensations, and sank under them. It was more than I could bear. I bent over her hand, kissed it in a stream of delicious tears, and again looked up to her eyes. Divine Klopstock! Why didst thou not see thy hypothesis in those eyes? And thy name so often profaned, would that I never heard it repeated. June 19. I no longer remember where I stopped in my narrative. I only know that it was 2 in the morning when I went to bed, and if you had been with me, that I might have talked instead of writing to you, I should, in all probability, have kept you up until daylight. I think I have not yet related what happened as we rode home from the ball, nor have I the time to tell you now. It was a most magnificent sunrise. The whole country was refreshed, and the raindrops fell drop by drop from the trees in the forest. Our companions were asleep. Charlotte asked me if I did not wish to sleep also, and begged of me not to make any ceremony on her account. Looking steadfastly at her, I answered, "As long as I see those eyes open, there is no fear of my falling asleep." We both continued awake until we reached her door. The maid opened it softly, and assured her, in answer to her inquiries, that her father and the children were well and still sleeping. I left her, asking permission to visit her in the course of the day. She consented, and I went, and, since that time, sun, moon, and stars may pursue their course. I know not whether it is by night or by day. The whole world is nothing to me. June 21st. My days are as happy as those reserved by God for his elect, and whatever be my fate hereafter, I can never say that I have not tasted joy, the purest joy of life. You know Walheim. I am now completely settled there. In that spot I am only half a league from Charlotte, and there I enjoy myself, and taste all the pleasure which can fall on the lot of man. Little did I imagine, when I selected Walheim for my pedestrian excursions, that all heaven lay so near it. How often in my wanderings from the hillside or from the meadows across the river have I beheld this hunting lodge, which now contains within it all the joys of my heart! I have often, my dear Wilhelm, reflected on the eagerness men feel to wander and to make new discoveries, and upon that secret impulse which afterward inclines them to return to their narrow circle, conform to the laws of custom, and embarrass themselves no longer with what passes around them. It is so strange how, when I first came here, and gazed upon that lovely valley from the hillside, I felt charmed with the entire scene surrounding me. The little wood opposite, how delightful to sit under its shade! How fine the view from that point of rock! Then that delightful chain of hills, and the exquisite valley at their feet! Could I but wander and lose myself among them? I went, and returned without finding what I wished. Distance, my friend, is like futurity. A dim vastness is spread before our souls. The perceptions of our mind are so obscure as those of our vision, and we desire earnestly to surrender upon our whole being, that it may be filled with the complete and perfect bliss of one glorious emotion. But alas! when we have attained our object, when the distance there becomes the present here, all is changed. We are as poor and circumscribed as ever, and our souls still languish for unattainable happiness. So does the restless traveller pant for his native soil, and find in his own cottage, in the arms of his wife, in the affections of his children, and in the labour necessary for their support, that happiness which he has sought in vain through the whole wide world. When, in the morning at sunrise, I go out to Walheim, and with my own hands gather in the garden the peas which are to serve for my dinner, when I sit down to shell them, and read my Homer during the intervals, and then, selecting a saucepan from the kitchen, fetch my own butter, put my mess on the fire, cover it up, and sit down and stir it as occasion requires, I figure to myself the illustrious suitors of Penelope killing, dressing, and preparing their own oxen and swine. Nothing fills me with a more pure and genuine sense of happiness than those traits of patriarchal life, which, thank heaven, I can imitate without affectation. Happy it, indeed, for me my heart is capable of feeling the same simple and innocent pleasure as the peasant whose table is covered with food of his own rearing, and who not only enjoys his meal, but remembers with delight the happy days and sunny mornings when he planted it, the soft evenings he watered it, and the pleasure he experienced in watching its daily growth. June 29. The day before yesterday, the physician came in from town to pay a visit to the judge. He found me on the floor playing with Charlotte's children. Some of them were scrambling over me, and others romping with me, and, as I caught and tickled them, they made a great noise. The doctor is a formal sort of personage. He adjusts the plaits of his ruffles, and continually settles his frill whilst he is talking to you, and he thought my conduct beneath the dignity of a sensible man. I could perceive this by his countenance, but I did not suffer myself to be disturbed. I allowed him to continue his wise conversation, whilst I rebuilt the children's card house for them as fast as they threw them down. He went about the town afterwards, complaining that the judge's children were spoiled enough before, but now Werther was completely ruining them. Yes, my dear Wilhelm, nothing on this earth affects my heart so much as children. When I look on at their doings, when I mark in the little creatures the seeds of all those virtues and qualities which they will one day find so indispensable, when I behold in the obstinate all the future firmness and constancy of a noble character, in the capricious that levity and gaiety of temper which will carry them lightly over the dangers and troubles of life, their whole nature simple and unpolluted. Then I call to mind the golden words of the great teacher of mankind, "Unless ye become like one of these." And now, my friend, these children, who are our equals, whom we ought to consider as our models, we treat them as though they are our subjects. They are allowed no will of their own, and we, then, none ourselves. Whence comes our exclusive right? Is it because we are older and more experienced? Great God! From the height of thy heaven thou beholdest great children and little children, and no others, and thy Son has long since declared which afford thee greatest pleasure. But they believe in him, and hear him not. That, too, is an old story, and they train their children after their own image, etc. Adieu, Wilhelm. I will not further bewilder myself with this subject. End of section 2 of the Sorrows of young Werther. Section 3 of the Sorrows of young Werther. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Sorrows of young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, as read by Rob De Lorenzo in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Section 3. July 1st. The consolation Charlotte can bring to an invalid I experience from my own heart, which suffers more from her absence than many a poor creature lingering on a bed of sickness. She is gone to spend a few days in town with a very worthy woman, who was given over by the physicians, and wishes to have Charlotte near her in her last moments. I accompanied her last week on a visit to the Vicar of S., a small village in the mountains, about a league hence. We arrived around 4 o'clock. Charlotte had taken her little sister with her. When we entered the vicarage court, we found the good old man sitting on a bench before the door, under the shade of 2 large walnut trees. At the sight of Charlotte, he seemed to gain new life, rose, forgot his stick, and ventured to walk toward her. She ran to him and made him sit down again. Then, placing herself by his side, she gave him a number of messages from her father, and then caught up his youngest child, a dirty, ugly little thing, the joy of his old age, and kissed it. I wish you could have witnessed her attention to this old man, how she raised her voice on account of his deafness, how she told him of healthy young people who had been carried off when it was least expected, praised the virtues of Carlsbad, and commended his determination to spend the ensuing summer there, and assured him that he looked better and stronger than he did when she saw him last. I, in the meantime, paid attention to his good lady. The old man seemed quite in spirits, and as I could not help admiring the beauty of the walnut trees, which formed such an agreeable shade over our head, he began, though with some little difficulty, to tell us of their history. As to the oldest, he said, we do not know who planted it. Some say one clergyman, some say another. But the younger one, here behind us, is exactly the age of my wife, 50 years old next October. Her father planted it in the morning, and in the evening she came into the world. My wife's father was my predecessor here, and I cannot tell you how fond he was of that tree, and it is fully as dear to me. Under the shade of that very tree, upon a log of wood, my wife was seated knitting, when I, a poor student, came into this court for the first time, just 27 years ago. Charlotte inquired for his daughter. He said she was gone with Herr Schmidt to the meadows, and was with the haymakers. The old man resumed his story, and told us of how his predecessor had taken a fancy to him, as had his daughter likewise, and how he had become first his curate, and subsequently his successor. He had scarcely finished his story when his daughter returned through the garden, accompanied by the above-mentioned Herr Schmidt. She welcomed Charlotte affectionately, and I confess I was taken by her appearance. She was a lively-looking, good-humoured brunette, quite competent to amuse one for a short time in the country. Her lover, for such Herr Schmidt evidently appeared to be, was a polite, reserved personage, and would not join our conversation, notwithstanding all of Charlotte's endeavours to draw him out. I was much annoyed at observing, by his countenance, that his silence did not arise from want of talent, but from caprice and ill humour. This subsequently became very evident when we set out for our walk, and Frederica joined Charlotte, with whom I was talking. The worthy gentleman's face, which was naturally sombre, became so dark and angry that Charlotte was obliged to touch my arm, and remind me that I was talking too much to Frederica. Nothing distresses me more than to see men torment each other, particularly when in the flower of their age, in the very season of their pleasure. They waste the few short days of sunshine in quarrels and disputes, and only perceive their error when it is too late to repair it. This dwelt upon my mind, and in the evening, when we returned to the Vicar's, and were sitting round the table with our bread and milk, the conversation turned on the joys and sorrows of the world. I could not resist the temptation to inveigh bitterly against ill humour. "We are apt," said I, "to complain, but with very little cause, that our happy days are few, and our evil days are many. If our hearts were always disposed to receive the benefits heaven sends us, we should acquire strength to support evil when it comes. But," observed the Vicar's wife, "we cannot always command our tempers. So much depends upon the constitution. When the body suffers, the mind is also ill at ease." "I acknowledge that," I continued, "but we must consider such a disposition in the light of a disease, and inquire whether there is no remedy for it." "I should be glad to hear one," said Charlotte. "At least, I think, very much depends upon ourselves. I know it is so with me. When anything annoys me and disturbs my temper, I hasten into the garden, hum a couple of country dances, and it is all right with me directly." "That is what I meant," I replied. "Ill humour resembles indolence. It is natural to us, but if we have the courage to exert ourselves, we find our work run fresh from our hands, and we experience in the activity from which we shrank a real enjoyment." Frederica listened very attentively, and the young man objected that we were not masters of ourselves, and still less of our feelings. "The question is about a disagreeable feeling," I added, "from which every one would willingly escape, but none know their power without trial. Invalids are glad to consult physicians, and submit to the most scrupulous regime, the most nauseous medicines, in order to recover their health." I observed that the good old man inclined his head, and exerted himself to hear our discourse, so I raised my voice, and addressed myself directly to him. "We preach against a great many crimes," I observed, "but I never remember a sermon delivered against ill humour." "That may do very well for your town clergyman," he said. "Country people are never ill-humoured, though, indeed, it might be useful occasionally to my wife, for instance, and to the judge." We all laughed, as did he likewise very cordially, till he fell into a fit of coughing, which interrupted our conversation for a time. Herr Schmidt resumed the subject. "You call ill humour a crime," he remarked, "but I think you use too strong a term." "Not at all," I replied, "if that deserves the name which is so pernicious to ourselves and our neighbours. Is it not enough that we want the power to make one another happy? Must we deprive each other of the pleasure which we can all make for ourselves? Show me the man who has the courage to hide his ill humour, who bears the whole burden himself, without disturbing the peace of those around him. No, ill humour arises from an inward consciousness, from our own want of merit, from a discontent which ever accompanies that envy which foolish vanity engenders. We see people happy whom we have not made so, and cannot endure the sight." Charlotte looked at me with a smile. She observed the emotion which I spoke, and a tear in the eye of Frederica stimulated me to proceed. "Woe unto those," I said, "who use their power over a human heart to destroy the simple pleasures it would naturally enjoy. All the favours, all the attentions in the world cannot compensate for the loss of that happiness which a cruel tyranny has destroyed." My heart was full as I spoke. A recollection of many things which had happened pressed upon my mind, and filled my eyes with tears. "We should daily repeat to ourselves," I exclaimed, "that we should not interfere with our friends, unless to leave them in possession of their own joys, and increase their happiness by sharing it with them. But when their souls are tormented by a violent passion, or their hearts rent with grief, is it in your power to afford them the slightest consolation? And when the last fatal malady seizes the being whose untimely grave you have prepared, when she lies languid and exhausted before you, her dim eyes raised to heaven, and the damp of death upon her pallid brow, there you stand at her bedside like a condemned criminal, with a bitter feeling that your whole fortune could not save her, and the agonizing thought wrings you that all your efforts are powerless to impart even a moment's strength to the departed soul, or to quicken her with a transitory consolation." At these words, the remembrance of a similar scene at which I had been once present fell upon me with full force. I buried my face in my handkerchief, and hastened from the room, and only was recalled to my recollection by Charlotte's voice, who reminded me that it was time to return home. With what tenderness she chided me on the way for the too eager interest I took in everything! She declared it would do me injury, and that I ought to spare myself. Yes, angel, I will do so for your sake. July 6th. She is still with her dying friend, and is still the same bright, beautiful creature whose presence softens pain and sheds happiness around whichever way she turns. She went out of town yesterday with her little sisters. I knew it, and went to meet them, and we walked together. In about an hour and a half we returned to the town. We stopped at the spring I am so fond of, and which is now 1,000 times dearer to me than ever. I looked around and recalled the time when my heart was unoccupied and free. "Dear fountain," I said, "since that time I have no more come to enjoy cool repose by thy fresh stream. I have passed thee with careless steps, and scarcely bestowed a glance upon thee. I looked down and observed Charlotte's little sister, Jane, coming up the steps with a glass of water. I turned towards Charlotte, and I felt her influence over me. Jane at that moment approached with the glass. Her sister, Marianne, wished to take it from her. "No!" cried the child, with the sweetest expression of face. "Charlotte must drink first." The affection and the simplicity with which this was uttered so charmed me that I sought to express my feelings by catching up the child and kissing her heartily. She was frightened and began to cry. "You should not do that," said Charlotte. I felt perplexed. "Come, Jane," she continued, taking her hand, and leading her down to the steps again. "It is no matter. Wash yourself quickly in the fresh water." I stood and watched them, and when I saw the little dear rubbing her cheeks with her wet hands, in full belief that all the impurities contracted by my ugly beard would be washed off by the miraculous water, and how, though Charlotte said it would do, she continued still to wash with all her might, as though she thought too much were better than too little, I assure you, Wilhelm, I never attended a baptism with greater reverence, and, when Charlotte came up from the well, I could have prostrated myself as before the prophet of an Eastern nation. In the evening, I would not resist telling the story to a person who, I thought, possessed some natural feeling, because he was a man of understanding. But what a mistake I made! He maintained it was very wrong of Charlotte, that we should not deceive children, that such things occasioned countless mistakes and superstitions from which we were bound to protect the young. It occurred to me, then, that this man had been baptized only the week before, so I said nothing further, but maintained the justice of my own convictions. We should deal with children as God deals with us. We are the happiest under the influence of innocent delusions. July 8th. What a child is a man that he should be so solicitous about a look! What a child is man! We had been to Walheim. The ladies went in a carriage, but during our walk I thought I saw Charlotte's dark eyes. I am a fool, but forgive me. You should see them, those eyes. However, to be brief, for my eyes are weighted down with sleep, you must know, when the ladies stepped into their carriage again, young W. Slenstad, Adrian, and I were standing about the door. They were a merry set of fellows, and they were all laughing and joking together. I watched Charlotte's eyes. They wandered from one to the other, but they did not light upon me, who stood there motionless, and who saw nothing but her. My heart bade her 1,000 times adieu, but she noticed me not. The carriage drove off, and my eyes filled with tears. I looked after her. Suddenly, I saw Charlotte's bonnet leaning out of the window, and she turned to look back. Was it at me? My dear friend, I know not, and in this uncertainty I find consolation. Perhaps she turned to look at me. Perhaps. Good night. What a child I am. July 10. You should see how foolish I look in company when her name is mentioned, particularly when I am asked plainly how I like her. How I like her! I detest that phrase. What sort of a creature he must be who merely liked Charlotte, whose whole heart and senses were not entirely absorbed by her. Like her? Someone asked me lately how I liked Ossian. July 11th. Madame M. is still very ill. I pray for her recovery, because Charlotte shares my sufferings. I see her occasionally at my friend's house, and today she told me the strangest circumstance. Old M. is a covetous, miserly fellow, who had long worried and annoyed the poor lady sadly, but she had borne her afflictions patiently. A few days ago, when the physician informed us that her recovery was hopeless, she sent for her husband. Charlotte was present, and addressed him thus: I have something to confess, which, after my decease, may occasion trouble and confusion. I have hitherto conducted your household as frugally and as economically as possible, but you must pardon me for having defrauded you for 30 years. At the commencement of our married life, you allowed a small sum for the wants of the kitchen and other household expenses. When our establishment increased and our property grew larger, I could not persuade you to increase the weekly allowance in proportion. In short, you know, that when our wants are greatest, you required me to supply everything with 7 florins a week. I took the money from you without an observation, but made up the weekly deficiency from the money chest, as nobody would suspect your wife of robbing the household bank. But I have wasted nothing, and should have been content to meet my eternal judge without this confession, if she, upon whom the management of your establishment will devolve after my decease, would be free from the embarrassment upon your insisting that the allowance made to me, your former wife, was sufficient. I talked to Charlotte of the inconceivable manner which men allow themselves to be blinded, how any one could avoid suspecting some deception, when 7 florins were only allowed to defray expenses twice as great. But I have myself known people who believed, without any visible astonishment, that their house possessed the prophet's never-failing cruse of oil. July 13th. No, I am not deceived. In her dark eyes I read a genuine interest in me and in my fortunes. Yes, I feel it, and I may believe my own heart which tells me, dare I say it? Dare I pronounce the divine words, that she loves me? That she loves me? How the idea exalts me in my own eyes! And as you can understand my feelings, I may say to you how I honour myself, since she loves me. Is this presumption, or is this consciousness of the truth? I do not know a man able to supplant me in the heart of Charlotte. And when she speaks of her betrothed with so much warmth and affection, I feel like the soldier who has been stripped of his honours and titles, deprived of his sword. July 16th. How my heart beats! By accident I touched her finger, or my feet meet hers under the table. I draw back as if from a furnace, but a secret force impels me forward again, and my senses become disordered. Her innocent, unconscious heart never knows what agony these little familiarities inflict upon me. Sometimes, when we are talking, she lays her hand upon mine, and in the eagerness of conversation comes closer to me, and her balmy breath reaches my lips, when I feel as if lightning has struck me, and that I could sink into the earth. And yet, Wilhelm, with all this heavenly confidence, if I know myself and should ever dare, you understand me. No, no, my heart is not corrupt. It is weak, weak enough, but is not that a degree of corruption? She is to me a sacred being. All passion is still in her presence. I cannot express my sensations when I am near her. I feel as if my soul beat in every nerve of my body. There is a melody which she plays on the piano with angelic skill. So simple it is, and yet so spiritual. In her favorite air, and when she plays the first note, all pain, care, and sorrow disappear from me in a moment. I believe every word that is said of the magic of the ancient music. How her simple song enchants me! Sometimes, when I am ready to commit suicide, she sings that air, and instantly the gloom and madness which hung over me are dispersed, and I can breathe freely again. July 18. Wilhelm, what is the world to our hearts without love? What is a magic lantern without light? You have but to kindle the flame within, and the brightest figures shine on the white wall, and, if love only shows us fleeting shadows, we are yet happy, when, like mere children, we behold them, and are transported with the splendid phantoms. I have not been able to see Charlotte today. I was prevented by company from which I could not disengage myself. What was to be done? I sent my servant to her house, that I might at least see somebody today who had been near her. Oh, the impatience with which I wait for his return! The joy which I welcome him! I should certainly have caught him in my arms and kissed him, if I had not been ashamed. It is said that the bonastone, when placed in the sun, attracts the rays, and for a time appears luminous in the dark. So it was with me and this servant. The idea that Charlotte's eyes had dwelt upon his countenance, his cheek, his very apparel, endeared them all inestimably to me, so that at that moment I would not have parted him for 1,000 crowns. His presence made me so happy. Beware of laughing at me, Wilhelm. Can that be a delusion which makes us happy? July 19th. I shall see her today, I exclaimed with delight, when I rise in the morning, and look out with gladness of heart at the bright, beautiful sun. I shall see her today, and then I have no further wish to form. All is included in that one thought. July 20th. I cannot assent to your proposal that I should accompany the ambassador to . I do not love subordination, and we all know that he is a rough, disagreeable person to be connected with. You say my mother wishes me to be employed. How could I not help laughing at that? Am I not sufficiently employed? And is it not in reality the same, whether I shell peas or count lentils? The world runs from one folly to another, and the man who, solely from the regard to the opinion of others, and without any wish or necessity of his own, toils after gold, honour, or any other phantom, is no better than a fool. July 24. You insist so much on my not neglecting my drawing, that it would have been as well for me to say nothing as to confess how little I have done lately. I have never felt happier. I never understood nature better, even down to the veriest stem or the smallest blade of grass. And yet I am unable to express myself. My powers of execution are just so weak. Everything seems to swim and float before me, so that I cannot make a clear, bold outline. But I fancy I should succeed better if I had some clay or wax to model. I shall try, if this state of mind continues much longer, and will take to modelling, if I only need dough. I have commenced Charlotte's portrait 3 times, and have often disgraced myself. This is the more annoying, as I was formerly very happy in taking likenesses. I have since sketched her profile, and must content myself with that. July 25th. Yes, dear Charlotte, I will order and arrange everything. Only give me more commissions, the more the better. One thing, however, I must request. Use no more writing sand with the dear notes you send me. Today I raised your letter hastily to my lips, and it set my teeth on edge. July 26th. I have often determined not to see her so frequently. But who could keep such a resolution? Every day I am exposed to the temptation, and the promise faithfully that tomorrow I will really stay away. But when tomorrow comes, I find some irrestitutable reason for seeing her, and before I can account for it, I am with her again. Either she has said on the previous evening, "You will be sure to call tomorrow," and who could stay away then? Or she gives me some commission, and I find it essential to take her the answer in person. Or the day is fine, and I walk to Walheim, and, when I am there, it is only half a league farther to her. I am within the charmed atmosphere, and soon find myself at her side. My grandmother used to tell us of a story of a mountain of lodestone. When any vessels came near it, they were instantly deprived of their ironwork. The nails flew to the mountain, and the unhappy crew perished amidst the disjointed planks. July 30th. Albert is arrived, and I must take my departure. Were he the best and noblest of men, and I in every respect his inferior, I could not endure to see him in possession of such a perfect being. Possession! Enough, Wilhelm. Her betrothed is here, a fine worthy fellow, whom one cannot help liking. Fortunately, I was not present at their meeting. It would have broken my heart. And he is so considerate. He has not given Charlotte one kiss in my presence. Heaven reward him for it. I must love him for the respect with which he treats her. He shows a regard for me, but for this I suspect that I am indebted to Charlotte than to his own fancy for me. Women have a delicate tact in such matters, and it should be so. They cannot always succeed in keeping 2 rivals on terms with each other, but when they do, they are the only gainers. I cannot help esteeming Albert. The coolness of his temper contracts strongly with the impetuosity of mine, which I cannot conceal. He has a great deal of feeling, and is fully sensible of the treasure he possesses in Charlotte. He is free from ill humour, which you know is the fault I detest most. He regards me as a man of sense, and my attachment to Charlotte, and the interest I take in all that concerns her, augments his triumph and his love. I shall not inquire whether he may not at times tease her with some little jealousies, as I know that, were I in his place, I should not be entirely free from such sensations. But, be that as it may, my pleasure with Charlotte is over. Call it folly or infatuation, what signifies the name? A thing speaks for itself. Before Albert came, I knew all that I know now. I knew that I could make no pretensions to her, nor did I offer any, that is, as far as it was possible, in the presence of so much loveliness, not to pant for its enjoyment. And now, behold me, like a silly fellow, staring with astonishment when another comes in and deprives me of my love. I bite my lips, and I feel infinite scorn for those who tell me to be resigned, because there is no help for it. Let me escape from the yoke of such silliness. I ramble through the woods, and when I return to Charlotte, and find Albert sitting by her side in the summer house in the garden, I am unable to bear it, behave like a fool, and commit 1,000 extravagancies. For heaven's sake, said Charlotte today, let us have no more scenes like the one of last night. You terrify me when you are so violent. Between ourselves, I am always away when he visits her, and I feel delighted when I find her alone. End of section 3 of the Sorrows of young Werther.